So as Katie mentioned, I lead two groups, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs and the International Poultry Welfare Alliance. In general, we try and help boil down these very, sometimes made to be overly complex issues into their individual parts and help our members understand where they fit in and where they can build programs around sustainability and welfare going forward. So we engage the entire supply chain. So in terms of sustainability, we're following the life cycle of that product all the way through from beginning to end. We saw kind of somewhat of some of those visuals in our last presentation in terms of how to calculate for that all the way through the supply chain. All the different people selling things into that supply chain, all the outputs that come from that system, and tracking that all the way through to the end until that product's sold at retail or food service. So as you can see here, we have a very diverse membership from different types of people representing growers, integrators and processors of poultry and egg products, allied industry, anybody selling anything to the system, pharmaceuticals, equipment, nutrition, renderers, retail and food service. So major retailers like Costco and Walmart, and then your quick serve restaurants like Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, Yum Brands, Restaurant Brands International. We do have a strong scientific engagement. I've seen several of our joint members here, but PSA is also a member of our group, and we're very happy to have PSA at the table representing kind of academia in this topic that we really think allows us to be stronger together by bringing everybody's voice to the table. So everybody's overwhelmed. That's what we hear from our members all the time. We don't know how to get started. We don't understand what sustainability means. We don't know how to calculate it. Once we do start calculating something, should we be doing something else? Should we be emphasizing anything else? And we're not here to necessarily dictate what someone does, but we do build we have built a framework to help people conceptualize where they are today and how they can advance their sustainability programs in the future, whether they're just getting started or whether they have a whole division or team like some of these major companies do working on sustainability. Where do the pressures or where is the why for sustainability coming from for the poultry and egg supply chain? So obviously our communities, maintaining our license to operate where we're producing poultry and egg products, both in terms of growers, processing plants, shared interest groups. We grew out of an industry council that was put together by the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association together with the National Chicken Council. We've involved the American Egg Board, the United Egg Producers, the National Turkey Federation, groups like PSA, groups like PACO, groups like AAAP, obviously all working on this together. Employees are one of the most interesting parts of sustainability that I don't think people are thinking about enough. Our image to our investors that I'll talk about here in a little bit is very important, but as we see a new generation of employees coming in and we start hearing terms like AI and machine learning, I think the types of employees that we're going to have to attract in some aspects might change, their demographics might change, and certainly the kind of generational attitudes are changing towards who we want to work for and what type of organization we want to be a part of. There's a lot of data that talks about worker recruitment and retention around an employee's feeling whether their company is responsible and doing the right things in terms of environment and best practices. So we're going to have to be able to recruit a different type of employee that we haven't in the past, and I think it's very important that we're doing the right things and communicating those things in a way that connects with kind of this younger generation and the changing kind of demographics of the folks that we're going to be attracting to work within the poultry supply chain in the future. Partners, a lot of people are partnering with NGOs like the World Wildlife Fund or the Environmental Defense Fund to help put together their programs. I say customers as the major buyers of poultry products, so those members that I have, Yum Brands, Walmart, Costco, and then end consumers I have off to the side of that. So when I'm talking about customers, I'm talking about those major buyers. And then finally, investors. Investors are extremely important to this. A lot of people talk about the end consumer, et cetera, et cetera. They are changing. Obviously, they are the ones that vote with their pocketbook, so to speak, but investors have an outsized, I would say, influence on sustainability at large, not just in poultry and eggs, but in general. A lot of these things are coming through publicly traded companies, which whether you are a publicly traded company or not, chances are you're going to sell to a publicly traded company, and I'll talk about later about how that kind of trickles down through the supply chain in a way that will affect the poultry and egg industry, even if you come from a private company, because large institutional investors, not just activist investors, large institutional investors are asking for ESG data to help track their investments and where they're going to put capital going forward in the future. So we're a multi-stakeholder group. We help our members navigate a complex environment. We try and uncover and drive opportunities to continuously improve sustainability at the full supply chain level. We facilitate open communications across sectors. While we were putting together our sustainability framework, we did a lot of different surveys where we would then facilitate discussions between producers and maybe those customers that I just talked about as to why there were certain things that production cared about more and maybe food service cared about less, and vice versa. Why do you care so much about this as my major customer? Because that's not something that maybe we emphasize as much at the production level. And that allows us to share best practices and resources, and we're currently working on how we can support credible research and innovation for solutions. So not just academia, but also innovators, emerging technologies, vetting that, but also being a place where people can come with new innovations and technologies and be plugged into a group of people that can help look at those things, help them improve, and help get them to the marketplace more quickly. So these are our different constituencies. We have 5 different constituencies. I just like to use the board slide just to show how a round table would work. We have 3 different growers, 3 different integrator processor representatives, 3 different allied industry representatives, 3 different retail food service representatives, and 3 from civil society, and it's making up our 15-person board. These are our different committees, and this is what they're working on. Our framework committee obviously did a lot of work developing the framework that I'm here to talk about, but our continuous improvement committee is taking it one step further. Where do we go from here? How do we improve the data coming into our sustainability reporting framework? So, when we started this, we had to align on what sustainable poultry production is, and then in the hopes of continuously improving it based on measurable, actionable data. So we exist to go further and faster together. We've seen a lot of different industry initiatives not go as far as and as fast, and we've seen a lot of retail and food service initiatives that might generate a lot of buzz in the press, but never really get off the ground because they're missing key voices in the room. So our sustainability framework, our framework is a comprehensive reporting structure. It's not just a group of it's not both how we measure, but it's what we measure and then when we measure, coming through with a voluntary annual reporting tool that our members have where they get in and they report data into the system to be able to show continuous improvement over time, to be able to highlight where they might be able to do better, to be able to give us a aggregate report of the supply chain and to promote, which we'll be working on here shortly because our reporting deadline ends at the end of the month. And it really helps people narrow down what they want to work on from a sustainability perspective. So there's a lot of different areas that we talked about today. How do you decide where you're going to put your time? So what we first did was try and figure out what issues we're going to cover, or kind of a materiality assessment. What do we impact the what most? What is the most important? And we came up with 15 different priority areas broken out into people, planet, and poultry. So we've already talked about today feed, we've talked about water, we've talked about different aspects of animal welfare and animal well-being. Antibiotic stewardship we talked about earlier. So a lot of these things, food safety, of course, we've hit on a lot of these different things. But the biggest message that I often have to bring to the conversation, representing poultry and eggs specifically, is that sustainability is holistic. What is important for other segments of animal agriculture, might be important to us, but maybe in a different way or less so. So, for example, animal welfare, I think is important to anybody in animal agriculture production. But I think it's especially one of the highest ranking ones for us in comparison to maybe some of the other animal agriculture sectors. We employ a lot of people. You know, when I was in kind of grain and feed, we employed plenty of people. We like to talk about it. But certainly we are a major, major employer in some of these regions. So our people are incredibly important. And then obviously all the environmental components that I'll get into here a little later. I mentioned being a guidepost, so we have tier 1, 2, and 3 metrics, and those aren't meant to be gold, silver, bronze. We're not here to give out awards. We're here to help people understand where they are, where they can go from here, and how they can get better. And so tier 1, 2, and 3 are ways of kind of, we like to say tier 1's kind of the on-ramp, getting onto the highway. Tier 2 is the middle lane. Tier 3 is the fast lane. And they often build on each other. So like a tier 1 metric, does your company measure their energy use? If no, obviously you're not going to talk about the goals that you have to reduce your aggregate energy use. So first it's saying, might want to measure your aggregate energy use as a company, or maybe you're just measuring it facility by facility. But before you get to being able to reduce or set a goal, track that goal, meet that goal, first you need to start measuring it as a company and then build on from there. We have a dashboard in our system. We're currently working on different ways that our members can kind of splice data into different graphs to track their continuous improvement over time. Once again, they're in there annually reporting on a voluntary basis. I mentioned the 101 different metrics back here. They're all voluntary. They have the ability to decline to answer, to mark not applicable if something's not applicable to them. Obviously, what we are seeing is people measuring more and more things over time and tracking more and more things over time and building on to this over time and building on in a way that meets their organizational needs or where they want to emphasize. I did want to talk about a little bit about some recent data that we had come in from the American Egg Board. They did kind of a survey of customer surveys and really looked at a comparison between the framework, what the framework's asking, and then what our members are getting asked from major brands and customers, through their sustainability surveys. I would just want to mention that obviously you saw my original slide that we are here to meet the needs of major customers, but that is not the only reason for the sustainability framework. That is not our only audience. Obviously, we have multiple audiences. So we never really built it exactly for them, although it's obviously a major driver in this space in terms of what major buyers of poultry products are asking for. So we built the framework. We finished it about 2 years ago. So what's changed since then? We're talking about going through COVID and building a sustainability framework. You remember there being a lot of social issues going on at that time, labor issues at that time. We match really well with that. Food safety, I would say we're a little higher on than what we're being asked in customers. General environmental metrics, we're about on par with that. We have a larger animal welfare footprint than what the major customers are asking for in their surveys, and then we're a little light on climate. So I wanted to ask you all, what would you think would maybe contribute to us being a little lighter on climate compared to what the customers are asking? We as the poultry industry and supply chain came up with this framework. What would you think would be a reason why we were a little lighter on climate as compared to our customers? So, Dave? So I would agree with that, and I might go ahead. So climate obviously made the list within our framework. It is material to our supply chain. It is something that's important. It's something that we've reduced on an intensity basis over time. But we are getting asked questions for all animal agriculture products. So we're getting the same questions that beef is getting. We're getting the same questions that dairy is getting, the same questions that pork is getting. And we are getting kind of lumped into an all animal agriculture surveys. And when you look at those things, obviously, some of the other animal proteins have kind of different contributions to greenhouse gas emissions than others. And so I think we probably are naturally a little light on climate compared to where we need to be. But does it need to be 28% of what we are looking at and spending our time on? Or would we be better off, still spending our time on animal welfare, food safety, some of the things that we found were more material to this supply chain? So just food for thought. So, that kind of got into some of the other feedback that we looked into is, so we heard more specific data on climate. We've also heard back, more specific data on feed. And, I think where a lot of this is coming from is the Science Based Targets Initiative. So I mentioned the investors and the institutional investors. They are getting pressured to sign on to set science-based targets, and they are setting science-based targets. So if you get a chance, go to the Science Based Targets Initiative website and look at the companies that have signed up and set a science-based target, because chances are a lot of poultry producers or egg producers are selling through these major companies that are publicly traded. Those publicly traded companies, the Science Based Targets Initiative is set up by several different NGOs, including the Carbon Disclosure Project, World Wildlife Fund, Environmental Defense Fund, and the World Resources Institute. And so with that, target setting, there's rules in there about what you're going to need to do over time. And it says if 40% or more of a company's greenhouse gas emissions come from Scope 3 emissions, they are required to report their Scope 3 emissions through the Science Based Targets Initiative. So what are Scope 3 emissions? Scope 1 are direct emissions associated with company facilities and company vehicles. Scope 2 emissions are purchased electricity, steam, heating, and cooling for your own use within your own four walls. Scope 3 emissions are indirect emissions. So think of feed as an example. Unless you're a grain farmer, anybody else throughout the rest of that supply chain is going to look at feed as an indirect Scope 3 emission. So this will trickle down quite a ways throughout the supply chain and require a large increase in burden, might be too strong of a word, on the industry to be able to report these things if these companies are going to stick with the science-based targets that they've set, which so far they are, although we've seen in other initiatives where they sign on to something and then drop off later. So it's something major that's going on that I just want to point out. Where do our emissions in animal agriculture come from? Well, for us, in poultry and eggs, it overwhelmingly comes from feed, for the most part. Overall, this comes from the FAO, UN's FAO, enteric fermentation, or enteric emissions from ruminants is a large part of the calculation, and then followed by feed. So you see that kind of represented here on this kind of graph that's showing the portion that comes from methane, the portion that comes from CO2, and the portion that comes from nitrous oxide. So feed is something that all animal species, you see that all animal species, all emissions have feed listed here. So CO2, there's a feed, on methane, there's a feed, and on nitrous oxide, there's a feed as well. Who's working on this? So Field to Market is kind of our sister organization at the row crop level. iFeeder is kind of at the feed mill, millers level, plus manufacturers of feed ingredients. And then we're working on this, so is the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, so is the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, and then pork. The Pork Board, their We Cares program, are also working on this. I think there's a lot more need to work on feed together, collaboratively, rather than people doing it separately. That's something that we're trying to get to happen now. And I think PSA can play a part with our organization, and then also with organizations like iFeeder as well. So where do we go from here? One thing that I wanted to point out is that there's no guarantee that we're going to reduce animal emissions in ag going forward. We've all seen the graph that since 19-whatever, we've reduced beef emissions, pork emissions, chicken emissions by X percent. There's no guarantee that that's going to continue to occur. Well, I think it will, but I don't know for sure. There's a lot of different changes in antibiotic use policies. We saw a good speech on antibiotic use earlier. But if I'm a retailer food service company, I'm going to hire somebody that's a mile wide and an inch deep if I'm hiring a sustainability person, right? If you look at the number of different sustainability issues. What am I going to hear on antibiotics? I'm going to hear that we're 100% of the problem and that we're 0% of the problem. So what's the truth? And how do we communicate that? I think science communications is a very, very important thing for really the future of the supply chain, but really the future of the planet, the future for the animals, future for people. Changing production systems, blowback on factory farming. We've gotten very efficient. Market structures have allowed us to raise more animals more efficiently under one roof. But is that going to change? Are we going to get some sort of blowback on the scale of animal production in the United States? Animal welfare standards and regulations. We've seen a lot of work from both not just government, but also private initiatives to limit genetic growth rates, to lower stocking density. Inability to control animal disease. Greenhouse gas emissions, global warming says more heat, more disease, more stress on animals from that heat. So what is our biosecurity going to look like? We've already seen a lot of talk about vaccines as it relates to HPAI and the debate over that I won't get into, but it obviously exists. Are we going to be able to prevent and control diseases as they emerge in the future? And then through COVID, we really saw how vulnerable our supply chains really are, both in terms of our ability to get people to work, our modes of transportations, and our lack of redundancy in a lot of these different areas. Feed availability, lack of diversification. We all use very similar rations. Or is there an opportunity to build some redundancy in there to where the shocks from the system might not occur as strongly over time? So I wanted to share this graph. This is total greenhouse gas emissions from livestock supply chains globally. So the darker, the higher, the more tons of CO2 per square kilometer we see. Obviously, in the U.S., we see some dark spots there. So this is on an aggregate or a total basis. Now I'm going to do it on an intensity basis or per unit of product produced basis. So this is the total basis, and this is from the UN's FAO. This is per unit of product or on an intensity basis. We do really well in the United States. We're very efficient at producing animals. We're very efficient at producing products. That's one thing that, I wonder if over time, if we're going to still be able to do that in the future. But if we do reduce emissions, obviously I talked about genetic advancement. We've been very good at, increasing the efficiency. Disease resistance is something that, you hear more and more about. Animal environment. The last speaker touched on this some, but electronic monitoring, if you know anything about maybe the video and audio monitoring systems, we're talking about generating data all the time, 24/7, on a massive scale, and probably, we're very crude in our measurements at this time, and we're probably going to get to a point to where those measurements are going to become more precise and point us in the direction that we need to go a lot quicker and a lot faster, and tell us where to go and what to do in real time. So this data that we're about to generate is going to become overwhelming. How do we process it and what do we do with it? I think things will get a lot more precise in what it's telling us to do. Feed, both the sourcing of feed and then also feed innovations. So in the ruminant sector, on the cattle side of things, dairy and beef, there's a product right now called 3-NOP. And it can reduce enteric emissions by 1/3, but it's not approved in the United States. It's approved in Europe and a bunch of other places. Why isn't it approved here? Because it works on an environmental basis, and we don't have a pathway for feed for environmental-only products. We only have them to treat animals or to improve their efficiency. So are our regulatory systems going to kind of rise to the challenge and change with the times to be able to give us what we need? Could there be similar types of products within poultry? We already know about some of those things, obviously. Manure and litter management. There's a lot of different things I could talk about there. Animal health, research, innovations in prevention and intervention, and then energy and fuel use, lower emission sources, and increased use efficiency over time. So, I hope you are happy that I talked more about greenhouse gas emissions than everyone else. But it does, I would say, present a little bit of an outsized amount of my time goes to greenhouse gas emissions when looking at this sector. Where we can do better, we will do better, but we are also doing very well in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per product produced. So, where are we going from here? Obviously, we're trying to remove barriers to see this data get better, faster over time. We do that through kind of innovative financing, research, sharing best practices, innovative financing opportunities, and we hope to create a platform for creative problem solving. So with that, I'm happy to speak to any of you all at the break here that I know we're up for, and I appreciate your time.